You know how long I've been waiting for this? Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
I don't think you guys walk away from this.
You just make sure people know what happened here today.
The Pittsburgh Penguins, the NHL's biggest cock tease of the last few years, are entering the 2024-25 season in kind of a no man's land. After missing the playoffs the last 2 years, the Penguins are somewhere between a rebuild, a retool, and treading water. But what will that ultimately mean for the former Kings of the East in the 2024-25 season?
I admit it. Last year was rough.
After making some big moves before the 2023-24 season, the Pittsburgh Penguins were seen by just about anybody as being on the right path back to the playoffs after missing in embarrassing fashion the previous year. With Jake Guentzel returning, Evgeny Malkin back in the fold, Chris Letang re-signing, and the addition of former Norris Trophy winner Erik Karlsson, the Penguins really only had concerns about their depth and maybe a tiny bit about Tristan Jarry entering last year. What followed was one of the most tortuous or delicious, depending on your fandom, 9-month-long depth marches in NHL history. Penguins were just plain and simply unclutch as a team. They couldn't score on the power play. They lost a lot of those close games, and just like the year before, they had every chance down the stretch to cement themselves a spot in the playoffs, and they just fumbled the bag like Kevin Malone carrying in a pot of chili. When you go on a stretch of only winning 2 out of 10 games in late March, that's basically going to doom your entire season, setting the Penguins back to 500 that they couldn't overcome even with a strong push at the end of the season. Sully is back. Mike Sullivan returns behind the Pittsburgh Penguins bench as the head coach for the 10th season. And although there are delusional Yinzers who are begging that he be fired, truth of the matter is Mike Sullivan was and still is a very good head coach in the NHL. In 11 full seasons as a head coach in the NHL, including his time in Boston, he's only missed the playoffs 3 times and is still generally well respected amongst his players. Now, he did make a dumbass mistake by hiring Todd Reirden back as his defensive coach and power play specialist, and as all Capitals fans would have told you, that was going to work out terribly. But with Reirden gone, the expectations should be that Sullivan will get the ship righted and the Penguins will be back in the playoffs again. If he's not, I could see the Penguins making a change behind the bench, even though I think that another team would snap up Sully almost instantly in the offseason.
You're a star, you're on top, somebody bring you some hair.
You should kill yourself.
No surprise, it's Sid, who just inked a 2-year extension for, you guessed it, $8.7 million a year to stay in Pittsburgh through probably the end of his career. Even I must admit, Crosby had a very impressive season in 2023-24, putting up 42 goals and 94 points at age 36. Very impressive. Having gotten that out of the way, though, I would like to point out how curious it is that nobody is allowed to criticize Sidney Crosby for the fact that his teams over the last few years, despite having very good fortune of health and very solid nucleus of players that they added to before the season last year, have not just missed the playoffs the last 2 years, but missed them in embarrassing fashion. Whose player whose whole aura is around being a winner and a leader. Can we talk about the fact that 2 years ago, he blew their chance to make the playoffs by losing to 2 of the worst teams in the NHL? And then last year, blew their chances down the stretch to make the playoffs. I'm not suggesting it's Sid's fault that they missed the playoffs the last 2 years, far from it. But this motherfucker came into the NHL in maybe the best situation of anybody ever, getting to play alongside not 1, but 2 other number 1 overall picks and another top 2 pick. And yet everybody and their mother is just bending over backwards trying to explain away that he wasn't actually born on second base coming into the league. I've said it before, and I'll say it until I die. Unlike other superstars, if you put Sidney Crosby on Columbus, he ain't Sid the Kid.
Oh, this guy again.
And one of the reasons I did have to praise Crosby for his performance last year is because for the first time in maybe ever, he was surrounded by basically no talent. You know, if you remove Malkin, half a season of Guentzel, Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang, then yeah, he basically had nobody to play with. This year, he'll be centering Ricard Raquel, whose name always makes me think of one woman's exotic journey from Milan to Minsk, but doesn't make me think about offensive production. On his other flank, Brian Rust is fine. He's 20 goals, 50 points a year. You'd love to have that on your middle six, but not necessarily on your top line. The second line, though, it's Big Gino. Evgeny Malkin is centering the second line, taking pressure off of Crosby and making sure opposing defenses can't key on number 87. Going into his age 38 season, Malkin has been quietly still very productive and healthy the last few years, despite the fact that he is now forced to carry Michael Bunting and newly acquired Rutger McGroarty. But Bunting is at least an actual honest-to-goodness top six forward, while McGroarty is a pure wild card. On the third line, it's Drew O'Connor, who I almost called Who O'Connor about 50 times while rehearsing this. He'll be alongside Reclamation Project Kevin Hayes. Rounding out the third line is another Reclamation Project in Cody Glass, though not as big of one as Kevin Hayes. Glass was once seen as a very promising young prospect in Nashville before being jettisoned in the offseason. And if you're having trouble cracking the top 6 in Nashville as a forward, yeah, that's not a great look there, buddy. On the bottom line, it's perfect human Lars Eller, flanked by Noel Acciari, and Blake Lizotte brought in from LA. All in all, that's a good fourth line, some offensive skill, but mainly guys who are responsible and keep possession of the puck. On the back end, the Penguins are actually much more solid than their fans would have you believe. Of course, they have former Norris Trophy winner Erik Karlsson back there, who was healthy all of last year to absolutely everybody's shock. He's paired on the first pairing with Marcus Pettersson, a very solid defensive defenseman who's about to get signed to an extension that will have the Yinzers whinging for the next 5 years, while ignoring the fact that he is an effective penalty killer. On the second pairing, Chris Letang's still there, which is a credit to him after all of the health scares he's had to endure in the recent years, and still remains one of the better offensive defensemen in the NHL, though Pittsburgh Penguins fans are loath to admit that. He'll be next to Ryan Graves, who was signed last year to a bit of a bloated contract, but Graves was still quite solid last year in a shutdown role. The bottom pairing, though, is completely new. Matt Grzelcyk, brought in from Boston, is a really sneaky good value add in my opinion. He could play second pairing minutes if you needed him to, so you could see a lot of interchanging between him, Graves, and Pettersson. And then rounding out the bottom pair is the other Sebastian Aho from the Islanders, who had a very down last year in Long Island, but could be a prime bounce-back candidate. In the pipes, you've got Tristan Jarry, who is somebody you should be very comfortable with being your starting goaltender. He's easily a top 15 starter in the NHL, and a lot of times he's more close to the top 10 and maybe even top 7. And he'll be backstopped by Alex Nedeljkovic, who is, in my opinion, kind of the quintessential backup. You're fine playing him 20 to 25 games a year, but any more than that, it's going to start being a little dicey, which is what happened to the Penguins down the stretch last year, where they had to lean on Nedeljkovic a bit more than Jarry.
Oh, Britt is in this?
I already delved in a little bit to the third pairing with Grzelcyk and Sebastian Aho and Blake Lizotte on the fourth line, but the big acquisition of the offseason for the Penguins was actually bringing in some youth. Rutger McGroarty wanted out of Winnipeg, and despite the fact that the Penguins had a completely barren, they were somehow the ones who managed to snatch up. He was extremely productive in his last couple of years in Michigan, and knowing the Penguins' luck will become the next incarnation of Jake Gensel in the top 6. God forbid other NHL teams don't trip over themselves to try and help the Penguins and Crosby out of a bad situation.
That's not bad.
I really can't take the Crosby had no help complaints seriously last year, considering the fact that both Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson played all 82 games, and both of them are still elite-level defensemen. Sure, Karlsson didn't put up 100 points like he did in his Norris Trophy campaign, but he still put up 50 points and was an incredibly effective offensive driving defenseman, along with Chris Letang, who similarly 50 points, and along with Karlsson was top 20 among all defensemen in terms of point share. This Penguins defensive core is really sneaky good.
The Gambletron 2000 says the winner is Cincinnati by 200 points. Why, you worthless hunk of junk?
I said last year that the Penguins were not going to make the playoffs, and everybody pointed and laughed. And this year, I say, for the third year in a row, the Penguins are missing the playoffs. Their problem is exactly the same problem that they had last year. They have very little depth, and they are relying on a Big Four to carry them to the playoffs, and unlike other Big Fours in New Jersey or Toronto, they're just not as good. Everybody's deluding themselves into thinking that Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin are still top 20 players in the NHL. They are not. Penguins desperately need depth and youth behind them if they want to have a chance to make it into the playoffs anytime soon.
It's the end of an era for the Pens. GMJR sold the farm to try to get a run. Now we have the oldest team in the league as Sid Heads turns a retirement tour, and I'm a Yinzer. Good luck, Kyle.
Welcome to Planet Retirement Home. The Pens let Sid the kid's days of still being elite go to waste while not giving him a real chance to succeed and not rebuilding for the future. My boy Michael Bunting can run the team now.
This team's fan base seems to have no puck knowledge. I hate that they are wasting the rest of Crosby's career by just slowly letting the team die.
Oh boy, as a Capitals fan, man, do I have stuff to say about it. Kuzi's goal to finally get us past them was the best year of my life. Focusing on this year, though, I absolutely hate their whiny fan base. Oh, we should be made the playoffs instead of you. Well, then why didn't you? Why couldn't your sad little retirement home make the playoffs? Your depressing team of grandfathers aren't gonna make the playoffs. You're neck deep in an era where you don't want to suck, so you make garbage trades to try to get out of doing an actual rebuild, as your team slowly cripples and rots away top down. You're so focused on getting your ancient captain one more playoff run that you're unable to recognize your own incompetence in actually creating a good team to get you there. Kyle Dubas destroyed Toronto, and he's already begun the process of doing the exact same to you. There will come a day, very soon, when your team's own ineptitude will cascade into a freefall fully expected by everyone except for you. And on that day, the entire league will grab a glass, pour some whiskey into it, and cheer.